I am the Great Chen's most adored Empress, and the only survivor of the family the Emperor slaughtered. Alexander whispers of love, while his hands are stained with my kin's blood. Now, a ghost from my past besieges the city, demanding I betray the throne from within. One man offers me a world of ruins for revenge, the other would lose his empire just to save my life. As the gates tremble, I must decide, save the tyrant who loves me, or become the blade that ends his dynasty. Someone at court was trying to push more women into the harem again. That evening, the dinner hour had long passed, but the emperor had not arrived, nor had any messenger been sent. A table of delicacies grew cold, was reheated, and grew cold again. The servants in the Phoenix Palace hardly dared to breathe. This had never happened before. Ever since Alexander Chen ascended the throne and made me empress over everyone's objections, he has joined me for dinner every single day, come rain or shine, for more than 3 years. As the sky darkened, I finally rose, selected a bowl of thoroughly cold bird's nest soup, placed it in a food box, and carried it to the Moral Hall myself. If he would not come to me, then I would go to him. The lamps were lit in the Moral Hall. I had a eunuch announce my arrival. Soon, the chief imperial eunuch, Eunuch Gao, came out to greet me, his face split by a beaming smile. He bowed low. "Empress, you've come. His Majesty has been waiting for quite some time." I pushed open the door, food box in hand. I had barely crossed the threshold when I nearly tripped over a messy pile of memorials stacked on the floor. The man behind the desk looked up. Seeing I had caught my balance, he pretended to lower his head and focus on the documents again. With a dull thud, I placed the food box on the table. Without a word, I took out the bird's nest soup. The soup had long since congealed into a sticky lump that resembled boiled white fat. Whether it was bird's nest soup or fatty meat, both were things Alexander Chen detested. Alexander Chen glanced up, then pulled me by the waist until I landed sideways on his lap. He reached up to pinch my cheek, a smile playing in his eyes. "Angry? Kumph." I turned my head away with a cold snort. My impudence pleased him. He nuzzled my neck, showering it with hot, wet kisses. He nibbled my earlobe, his laugh infuriatingly smug. "Bella, I love it when you get jealous like this." "Don't worry," he murmured. "I rejected all of them. I don't want any of those women." My body gradually went limp in his arms, but a sliver of clarity remained. I had heard those words before. My palm was pressed against a half-open memorial. The ink smudged from the sweat on my hand, but I could still make out the words. "A flourishing line of heirs is the foundation of the nation." Perhaps sensing my distraction, Alexander Chen followed my gaze. He snatched the memorial and tossed it aside, letting it join the pile by the door. He was panting, his hot chest pressed against my back as he tried to soothe me. "Bella, we will have children too. Many, many children." The candle flame on the desk sputtered. In the heat of the moment, my fingertips traced the muscles of his back. I spoke softly. "Emperor, Marcus Liu is an official who has served with merit. Taking his daughter as a concubine is a political necessity." Alexander Chen stilled. He stared at me with dark eyes, silent for a long moment. The night air was as cool as water. I could feel my exposed skin growing colder by the second. Only the parts of me pressed against him remained scorching hot. So I pressed closer, holding him even tighter. When I woke the next day, Alexander Chen had already left for morning court. I wrapped myself in the quilt and feigned sleep, my mind a tangle of thoughts. Since ancient times, taking the daughters of meritorious officials into the palace has been a standard method of balancing power at court. Besides, Marcus Liu was an arrogant man. His daughter could serve as a bargaining chip, helping Alexander Chen keep him in check. With that thought, I opened my eyes and addressed Nanny Margaret, who was waiting by my bedside. "Nanny, would you say I am a virtuous and wise empress?" Nanny Margaret was a palace veteran. She had once served the current Empress Dowager, but after I became empress, Alexander Chen, feeling uneasy, assigned her to my service. Nanny Margaret gave a slight nod. "You are the most favored empress I have ever seen." When I first met Alexander Chen, and in all the years we grew up together after, it never once occurred to me that he would become emperor. That year, I was 12. I was leading a procession from West Pine, escorting my third uncle's coffin back to the capital. The journey took over half a month. By the time we reached the capital, it was late autumn. Waiting to greet us at the city gate was the second prince, Great Chen. I straightened my back, affecting an air of calm composure, but my mind was churning. I didn't really understand the difference between the crown prince and the second prince. I only remembered my grandfather telling me before I left that the crown prince would greet me personally at the gate and that upon seeing him, I was to perform a grand bow. So I dismounted and performed a solid kowtow. Great Chen helped me up, his expression mournful as he introduced the officials standing behind him. When he got to his fifth brother, Alexander Chen, he turned to find he was introducing him to empty air. His fifth brother had long since vanished. An official simply noted that he had an attendant with him. Our party entered the city and made for the Ye residence. I looked around with curiosity the entire way. On the streets, people recoiled in fear at the sight of our armed escort and the coffin we carried. I didn't understand. Lying in that coffin was my third uncle, the third son of the Ye family. He had defended Prosperity City for 3 months with only 5,000 light cavalry, protecting all its people and choosing to die rather than surrender. He was such a good man. What was there to be afraid of? We had traveled a long way, and the Ye family was newly bereaved. The emperor should have held a banquet to console us and offer his sympathies. But perhaps because I was the one escorting the coffin, still young and with no official post, merely the eldest grandchild of the Ye family, the emperor did not summon me to the palace. He only sent a eunuch to convey his condolences and bestow some rewards. I later learned that the eunuch with the shrill voice and arrogant demeanor was the imperial attendant Eunuch Gao, the grand eunuch who controlled the entire eastern depot. My third uncle's funeral was arranged with the help of the second prince. Since my uncle had never married or had children, it fell to me, his niece, to observe the mourning rites. I knelt in the mourning hall for 6 straight days. The second prince would come to kneel beside me for an hour or so each day, somehow looking even more grief-stricken than I was. I couldn't outcry him. My tears had already run dry back in West Pine. I looked up through the opening of the mourning tent at the night sky. The stars were dim. My little aunt always said the capital was wonderful in 1,000 ways, but I didn't see it. In the short time I had been here, I only felt that the sky was too small, the streets too crowded, and the music from the flutes and strings too loud. So, while the second prince was crying his heart out, I secretly slipped away. I had only been to this Ye residence in the capital once, when I was very little. Following a faint childhood memory, I pushed open a courtyard gate. The home was untended and terribly dilapidated. I climbed the large banyan tree in the courtyard. I remembered a bird's nest used to be there, and my third uncle had once climbed it with me to fetch the eggs. I didn't see a nest this time. Instead, my foot slipped. I, who had climbed countless trees, actually fell. Just as I braced myself to lose my front teeth, a piercing pain shot through my right ankle. And just like that, I was left hanging upside down in midair. It turned out that autumn had stripped the tree of its leaves, but a tangle of vines still hung from the branches. As I had struggled, one had wrapped around my ankle, saving my teeth but leaving me dangling helplessly between heaven and earth. When the sharp pain in my ankle faded to a dull numbness, I tried to use what strength I had to curl my body upward and pull at the vine. It was useless. I was completely exhausted. Hanging upside down for so long had caused the blood to rush to my head, and I could barely breathe. At that moment, I would have gladly lost my front teeth. After what felt like an eternity, the courtyard gate was pushed open, followed by a scream. Alexander Chen, clutching a roasted chicken, had just barged in. He turned and was startled by the sight of me dangling and swinging from the tree. Later, I would imagine the scene from his perspective. It must have been as terrifying as someone discovering a body hanging in the back courtyard in the middle of the night, while a wake was being held out front. In a daze, I saw the dagger sheathed at his waist. I tried to ask him for it, to cut the vine, but my tongue was numb and stiff. I could only make muffled, "ooh, oh," sounds. When Alexander Chen realized I was still alive, he sprang into action, by climbing the tree too. Unfortunately, his climbing skills were clearly inferior to mine. He couldn't get high enough and soon found himself stuck, unable to get back down. So stupid. Fortunately, he wasn't a complete fool. He knew how to call for help. By the time the guards heard his shouts and came to our rescue, I had nearly passed out, and his roasted chicken was completely cold. A short while later, the two of us were sitting side by side on a couch, each attended by an imperial physician. Mine was resetting my dislocated ankle, while his was applying medicine to his scrapes. It was only then that I learned he was the fifth prince, Alexander Chen, the one the second prince had introduced to empty air. I made my disdain for him clear. He frowned, not understanding. "But I saved your life." "Oof," I snorted coldly, deciding he needed a lesson. "You have to be good at using your surroundings as a weapon. Take that dagger of yours. If you'd used it to cut the vine, I would have been down much sooner, and you wouldn't be injured." Alexander Chen blinked and drew his dagger. "Oh, wonderful. It wasn't even sharpened. I just use it to scare people," he admitted. "It can't cut vines." All right, now I thought he was even stupider. A weapon with no edge, what good was that for scaring anyone? The physicians withdrew. I was curious why he'd been in the desolate back courtyard in the first place. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Second brother's crying is just too fake. I couldn't stand it. He's never even met your third uncle, but he's acting like they were sworn brothers. The moment you left, he stopped." He was certainly daring, saying such things without fear of me tattling. I asked him, "Why don't you learn to act like your second brother?" "I'm not going to be emperor. Why would I need to act like that?" What he said was actually quite reasonable. My third uncle's coffin lay in state for 7 days. Then, to the sound of mournful music, it was carried out for burial on Little Southern Hill, alongside my parents and grandmother, who had also died in battle. In my hemp mourning clothes, hobbling on my lame leg, I was busy all day. I looked up several times and saw Alexander Chen trailing behind the second prince. By the time we returned from Little Southern Hill, it was already late, so I had the second prince stay at the residence for the night. But halfway through dinner, I remembered something more important. I quietly got up, slipped past Alexander Chen, and bolted out the door. By the time he realized what was happening, his beloved fake dagger was in my hand. I grabbed him by the back of his collar, scaled the wall, and used that dagger to threaten him into guiding me to the Welcome Inn. My little aunt had told me the sweet cheese buns at the Welcome Inn were delicious. Since I had come all this way, I had to bring back some local specialties. The Welcome Inn was still open, not yet bankrupt. But the sweet cheese buns were gone. The waiter explained that the original chef had grown old and returned to his hometown 2 years prior. I was very unhappy. With a grand wave of my hand, I ordered 2 jars of wine. Before the wine even reached my lips, Alexander Chen snatched it away. Unfortunately for him, he wasn't as strong as me, so we ended up in a stalemate, each holding one side of the jar. I was confused. "What are you doing?" "My mother said you can't drink when you're injured." I wiggled my ankle. Far from being touched, I found him fussy and nagging, not at all manly. So I decided to scare him a little. "Have you ever tried the Blade Burner, brewed by Uncle Zhang from West Pine?" He shook his head. "It's the strongest liquor there is. One sip feels like your stomach is on fire, and you won't feel cold even in the dead of winter. A person like you would probably get drunk just from the smell. When my grandfather and the others went into battle, their wounds would be this long." I made an exaggerated gesture, with the white flesh turned out. "The army doctor would just take a mouthful of Blade Burner, spray it on the wound, and it would heal in a few days." He was, as expected, completely dumbfounded. "So, you see, your mother lied to you. The stronger the liquor, the better it is for wounds." I tossed him the other jar of wine, forcing him to drink with me. I don't know how many rounds we had, but we both got thoroughly drunk. I threw a drunken tantrum, demanded a whetstone from the inn's kitchen, and spent 2 hours sharpening his dagger until it had a proper edge. I taught him that if you really want to scare someone, it helps to be able to draw a little blood. Thinking back, I was so loyal to him, even then. Of course, in the end, he never got to take that dagger back to the palace. The word was that it had been confiscated by the second prince's guards, because a sharpened dagger was considered a weapon. Alexander Chen had apparently resisted, clutching the dagger and refusing to let it go, but it was useless. Instead, he was reprimanded by the second prince, and the blame for us sneaking out to drink was heaped on his head. He was put under house arrest. Even this brother, the only one he was remotely close to, treated him poorly. So on the day I left the capital, he couldn't come to see me off. I rode at the head of the procession, looking back every few steps. After all, we had shared wine together, which practically made us brothers. He wasn't being a very loyal friend. What a pity. I had really wanted to show off my black iron scimitar and tell him that this was the kind of weapon that could really scare people. The memories of those years flashed by in the time it takes to drink a few cups of tea. Then, it was back to the slow, heavy procession of the days. 10 days later, Marcus Liu's daughter Iris Liu entered the palace and was named Lady Liu. It was a rank neither high nor low. I estimated that her father and her father's powerful patron were not very satisfied. On Iris Liu's first night in the palace, she reportedly made a huge fuss. She demanded 3 attendant matrons and an entire basket of flower petals for her bath. A pity for the newcomer. The emperor didn't return to the harem for 3 straight days, and I started. A year after my third uncle was killed in battle, a major incident shook the capital. The second prince launched a rebellion, but before he even reached the city gates, he was ambushed by the chief eunuch, Eunuch Gao. Who wouldn't find it a joke? A prince of the Great Chen dynasty rebels, and the one to cleanse the court isn't a general or another prince, but a eunuch. Startled by this turn of events, the emperor finally managed to tear himself away from his beauties. He looked at the 2 neat rows of princes before him, some whose names he remembered, some he didn't, and decided it was too dangerous to keep so many sons around. So, with a stroke of his brush, he granted them all titles and sent them off to their own fiefdoms. The Prince of Jin's mother was a favorite, so he chose the prosperous Zhangzhou. The Prince of Ning's maternal family was powerful, so he took the picturesque Zhanzhou. By the time it was Alexander Chen's turn, all that was left was the poor and desolate Mingzhou. West Pine is located within the territory of Mingzhou. As was tradition, Alexander Chen was to inspect every corner of his fiefdom. Before his visit to West Pine, he sent me a letter detailing his itinerary. He also mentioned that he wanted to try the burning blade liquor I'd told him about. I was thrilled. I rushed into town and found Uncle Zhang, asking him to save a jar of his finest. Then I went to see Auntie Liu and told her my friend from the capital was coming, so she should put extra meat in her griddle cakes. The leader of the city's beggars tapped his bowl and asked me with envy, "You still have friends in the capital?" I nodded proudly. Of course I do. Even if he is a bit of a simpleton. When Alexander Chen arrived in West Pine, my grandfather and the others naturally hosted a banquet for him. I noticed he didn't seem to care much for the roast lamb, so the next morning, I dragged him into town. The street was bustling with noise. Auntie Liu, Uncle Zhang, and Scholar Huang were arguing again. Apparently, a customer had gotten drunk on a small cup of Uncle Zhang's potent liquor and run off to Auntie Liu's stall to dine and dash. In retaliation, the smoke from Auntie Liu's griddle cakes was now so thick it had soiled the pristine white paper Scholar Huang was using for a letter. By the time I broke up the fight, it was too late. We never got to drink the burning blade. How embarrassing. As I stood in the middle of the street, wondering where else we could find burning blade, Alexander Chen stared at me for a long moment. Then he took out a dagger and handed it to me. "Sharpen it for me again, will you? It won't get snatched this time." He was, after all, the Prince of Mingzhou now. I was so angry I had to laugh. Unbelievable. He really thought I was a blacksmith. The trouble began in Alexander Chen's 3rd month in Mingzhou. The old chieftain of the northern regions suddenly dispatched his troops, shattering the peace that had held on the border for over a year. My grandfather and uncles scrambled to repel the attack. I even started patrolling the city walls nightly, leaving me less and less time to write to Alexander Chen. The fighting at the front was desperate, but the supply of grain and fodder from the rear couldn't keep up. Day after day, I stood at the city gate, hoping to see the army escorting the supplies. 10 days later, Alexander Chen arrived with his personal guards. But inside the 3 large chests they brought, there was no grain, only silver. Alexander Chen had brought all the money he could raise, but there was nowhere to buy grain, even with silver to spare. After a sleepless night, I came up with a plan. Dozens of miles from Ping City lay Liangzhou, a trade hub for the Chen dynasty, the northern regions, and the various kingdoms of the western regions. Things were still relatively peaceful there. I decided to take the silver and try my luck. And before I left, I roped in the silver's owner, Alexander Chen. My grandfather would surely punish me for such a risky move, but Alexander Chen would make a good shield. We took a team of guards and headed west, managing to slip into Liangzhou without any trouble. The city was a melting pot of all sorts of people, including spies from the northern regions. To save time, we decided to split up and gather information separately. But we had underestimated the spies of the northern regions. Alexander Chen's identity was exposed, and assassins were sent after him. By the time I heard the news and rushed to his side, his guards were bogged down in combat, and he had been cornered. I gripped my dark iron scimitar and, in the nick of time, knocked away the sword swinging for his face. Alexander Chen's elbow was wounded and bleeding profusely. Without a second thought, I tore the ribbon from my hair and used it to stanch the bleeding. Seeing his pale face, I wiped the splattered blood from my own and tried to comfort him. "Don't worry, you're not going to die." Before I could finish, a blade sliced through the air. I tackled him to the ground, taking the hit in my back. The poison on the blade spread so quickly. Alexander Chen's voice, calling my name, grew fainter and fainter until everything went black and I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was back in West Pine. Alexander Chen was keeping watch by my bed. I didn't know how long I'd been unconscious, but he had a faint stubble on his chin. The army doctor said the poison had been cleansed from my system. I had no fever and just needed to rest to get back on my feet. Alexander Chen let out a heavy sigh of relief. I hate seeing others worry about me, so I tried to lighten the mood. I smiled and said, "So, was my dark iron scimitar impressive?" "Impressive, my foot." But Alexander Chen reacted like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. "Who gave you permission to save me? What was I supposed to do? File a formal petition with the court while the sword was aimed at your face? You saved me, but did you stop to think about yourself? You only have one life, you can't just throw it away." He stormed off, leaving me completely baffled. Everyone in my Yi family has ridden into battle to defend his Chen family's country. My grandfather protected his father. It's only right that I protect him. It is my duty. After that, Alexander Chen took very good care of me. Eventually, he stopped returning to his princely manor and spent all his time with me in Ping City. My young aunt jokingly asked him how long he planned to stay. He looked at me and said, "For a very, very long time." The West Pine wind was strong, whipping sand past my temples. I finished a set of fist forms and turned to see the tips of his ears were as red as the morning clouds. Iris Liu was making a gamble. She was betting that the poisoned tea wouldn't kill me. She was betting that to protect me, Alexander Chen would grant her a title and rewards. She won her bet. In just a few short months, she was elevated to a concubine of the first rank. Since Alexander Chen became emperor, his harem has been small. Besides me, there were only two other high-ranking concubines, Iris Liu and Sophia Du. Sophia Du was the Empress Dowager's niece and came from a deeply influential family. As the new year approached, Marcus Liu returned from West Pine. Alexander Chen held a banquet in the Heavenly Hall to reward his meritorious officials. I deliberately dressed simply that day, making the already bejeweled Iris Liu beside me look all the more extravagant. Marcus Liu hadn't come back alone. He'd brought his second-in-command with him. The man followed behind Marcus Liu, fanning himself with a feather fan as he entered the hall. In the flickering candlelight, I saw his face. Beside me, Alexander Chen stiffened, spilling wine from his cup. My own limbs trembled with excitement. A name echoed in my mind, Julian Wang. I knew that fool Marcus Liu could never have won a battle on his own. Now, learning that his second-in-command was Julian Wang, it all made sense. But wasn't Julian Wang supposed to be dead? Behind me, two court ladies were whispering, "Look at that man, he's terrifying." Yes, and he's fanning himself like some romantic scholar. He ought to take a look in a mirror. A long, purple scar had completely ruined what was once a handsome face. "This is my new second-in-command, a rare military talent," Marcus Liu announced. I looked at him as he stood in the middle of the hall, and our eyes met. The familiar cunning and arrogance in his upward-tilting eyes swept away all my doubts. Julian Wang was the son of the former Prime Minister of the Right, Mint Wang. My grandfather once described him as devilishly intelligent. Mint Wang and my father had been classmates at the palace school, the closest of friends. Later, one went to the battlefield and the other to the imperial court, but their families remained close. From a young age, Julian Wang was a natural strategist, even serving for a time as the second prince's secret advisor. When Mint Wang discovered this, he was furious and sent him to West Pine for my grandfather to discipline. That was how Alexander Chen and I came to know him. And because he was a few years older than me and exceptionally knowledgeable, my grandfather had him tutor me. Of course, I refused. I would always drag Alexander Chen along to play pranks on him, but we rarely succeeded. Later, Prime Minister Mint Wang became entangled in the court's power struggles. He was framed by eunuch Gao's faction, thrown into prison, and his entire family was executed. Julian Wang was far away in West Pine at the time. My grandfather could have helped him fake his own death to escape, but he insisted on returning to the capital. Before he left, he swore to us he would clear his father's name. But a few months later, news came of his death. Alexander Chen drank heavily at the banquet and stayed in my palace that night. After we had settled in for the night, he held me close, the drunkenness in his eyes finally fading. "Bella, did you see? He's alive." His voice was filled with excitement. I could barely stop myself from pulling him aside today. I wanted to ask him what he's been through all these years, why he's working for Marcus Liu if he's suffered. As he spoke, his voice grew heavy. I knew his life on the throne wasn't easy. He often had nightmares and would lie awake for hours afterward. I knew he was afraid. Alexander Chen used to cherish his life above all else. When his mother first entered the palace, she was favored by the emperor, but she was later harmed by the Empress, fell from favor, and her entire household was executed. His mother nearly died protecting him. From his earliest memories, Alexander Chen had witnessed countless harem conflicts, so he understood that feigning incompetence was his only path to survival. Initially, his mother's family, the Duke clan, had ambitions for him to compete for the throne. But as he grew older, he seemed so utterly incapable that they eventually gave up on him. According to his original plan, he would have moved far away from the capital after being made a prince and lived out his days in peace. But fate had other plans. He met me, fell in love with me, and for my sake, he returned to the capital. In the imperial court, he was constrained by the Du family, his maternal relatives, and other powerful officials. In the harem, there were plotting concubines like Iris Liu, and at his side, he had the venomous snake, eunuch Gao. Within these towering palace walls, we only had each other to hold for warmth. But now, Julian Wang was back too, and that brought us some small comfort. The next day, snow fell on the capital. Early in the morning, Lily ran in cheerfully, holding a few branches of red plum blossoms in full bloom. "Your Majesty, the blossoms in the plum garden are so beautiful. It looks like a cloud of red. Let's go see them." The sky had cleared after the snow, and the red blossoms were dazzling, but I always preferred white plum blossoms, whiter than the snow itself. The white plum trees were scarce, though. I went searching for them, and before I knew it, I was deep in the garden. Lily was nowhere in sight. Suddenly, a figure emerged from behind a tree. Before I could cry out, he looked up at me. It was Julian Wang, dressed as a guard. He didn't call me Your Majesty, but used my childhood name instead, Belle. I had been wondering how I could meet him alone, without the palace spies noticing. I was both surprised and overjoyed. "Julian, you're alive! Why haven't you contacted us all these years? Where have you been? How did you end up as Marcus Liu's second-in?" I trailed off as a sudden realization dawned on me. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The palace was crawling with eunuch Gao's eyes and ears. He had only just returned from West Pine. How could he move so freely within the palace? Julian Wang stepped closer, sending a shower of snow down from the branches above. But a sudden, inexplicable nervousness washed over me. "Belle, aren't you happy to see me alive?" "Of course I am," I nodded. "The Emperor is very happy too." Julian Wang smiled and asked a strange question. "Are you happy being Empress?" Footsteps approached from a distance. It was Iris Liu and a group of concubines, also out to admire the plum blossoms. Just then, Lily returned with a large bouquet of them. "Greetings, Your Majesty," Iris Liu said, offering a noticeably perfunctory curtsy. I bore the empty title of Empress, with no real power or influence to back it up. I had no intention of getting entangled with her. But on the way back to my palace, Julian Wang's final question burned in my mind. "Belle, my family, all 320 of them, and the men of your Yi family all died because of his Chen family's imperial clan. Do you really think the three of us can go back to how we were?" I had said those same words to Alexander Chen. The Second Prince's rebellion was crushed by eunuch Gao and the Eastern Depot. His maternal family was implicated and executed. This left the Crown Prince's faction unopposed. More than half the court officials were his protégés or advisors, creating a counterbalance to the manipulative eunuch Gao. In factional struggles, military power and wealth are paramount. The Yi family had an ancestral rule: never get involved in factional politics. When the Crown Prince failed to win us over, he decided to have the Empress's own brother, General Victor Cheng, replace my family. That year, I had just come of age. In the first snows of winter, Alexander Chen set off for the capital to celebrate the emperor's birthday. It was then that the northern regions, having just ended a civil war, sent a 100,000-strong army to attack Ping City. My grandfather and uncles led our troops to its defense. They sent multiple letters to the capital, pleading for reinforcements, but only when Ping City was on the verge of falling did Victor Cheng finally arrive with his men. But by then, my grandfather and uncles were already surrounded. After arriving, Victor Cheng merely fortified his position and refused to mount a rescue, using the excuse that he feared a trap. I escaped Ping City and rode non-stop to the capital to plead for help, only to be told that the court was suspended for 7 days for the emperor's birthday celebrations. While the soldiers on the front lines endured ice and snow, the imperial family in the capital feasted and made merry. How ironic. I had no choice but to ride back to Ping City. But as soon as I entered the city, I was ambushed by Victor Cheng's men. I was outnumbered and eventually subdued. I woke up in Alexander Chen's princely manor. My grandfather and uncles had died on the battlefield. The Ye family had been framed for treason, accused of hoarding military power, and Victor Cheng had successfully seized control of West Pine and its army. I was severely injured, frantic with worry, but unable to even leave my bed. At first, Victor Cheng's men came to the manor repeatedly, demanding I be handed over. I drifted in and out of consciousness, so I don't know how Alexander Chen managed to protect me. I only know that eventually, Victor Cheng's men stopped coming, and Alexander Chen was gone. About half a year later, Alexander Chen returned. He told me he was taking me to the capital, and that he would marry me. Tears slid from the corners of my eyes. I bit down hard on his neck, blood mixed with my tears, salty and bitter on my tongue. "Alexander Chen, your imperial brother destroyed my family. Your imperial father believed slander and allowed my family's army to be wronged. After such a deep-seated feud, do you really think the two of us can go back to how we were?" The needle and thread slipped from my hand unnoticed. I stared blankly at Lily as she arranged flowers on the table. Julian Wang was back. What was his goal? He could move freely through the palace and had even bribed someone close to me. The floor heaters were burning hot, but a chill ran through me all the same. This winter was colder than any I could remember. A severe frost had struck the Chen dynasty, killing countless crops and livestock. The end of the 4th year of the Qiping era passed in a haze of unease. On the 16th day of the first month, just as the court reconvened, a major event occurred. The northern regions, our old enemy, had changed rulers again. The new Chanyu, Prince Darius, had taken the initiative to send an envoy, announcing that he would come to our court in person to pay homage. Prince Darius had once been the old Chanyu's least favored son. But under his leadership, his tribe had grown strong, their army formidable, and his own prestige had steadily risen. This visit to pay homage was a gesture of extreme humility, but it was highly likely he was coming to probe the dynasty's strengths and weaknesses. Since Prince Darius was visiting, a banquet was naturally held in his honor. I'd never had any fondness for the people of the northern regions. Feeling frustrated, I drank a little too much and excused myself from the banquet. I hadn't gone far when I came across within.One and Prince Darius talking in hushed tones behind a rockery. They seemed far too familiar with each other. My mind flooded with suspicion, and my unease grew stronger. "Your Majesty, have you heard enough?" within.One had spotted me. I had no choice but to step out from behind the rockery. Only then did I get a close look at this new Chanyu of the northern regions. "Her Majesty the Empress seems curious," within.One said in a teasing tone. I ignored him and looked at Prince Darius, speaking slowly. "I'm merely curious what methods you used to climb to your position over your older brother's dead body." "Methods?" Prince Darius shook his head. "I simply put the tribe first. I developed pastures and reduced warfare. Over time, the people naturally gave me their hearts. I was taken aback." "Your Majesty, it would be rude to be away for too long. The Emperor is looking for you." On the way back, within.One leaned close and said in a voice only I could hear, "Putting the people's welfare first is the foundation of a nation. Even so-called barbarians know this." "Humph, as if that barbarian wasn't taught by you." Alexander Chen was indeed looking for me. within.One and I returned to our seats one after the other. Head bowed and shoulders stooped, Eunuch Gao glanced at me and then at within.One. I felt a prickling on my back, but within.One simply continued to fan himself, perfectly at ease. I turned my head and met Alexander Chen's worried eyes. He squeezed my hand tightly, and only then did I realize my nails were digging so deeply into my palm that it had turned red. After the harsh winter came spring. During the first spring rain in the capital, news arrived from the Spring Palace. Iris Liu was pregnant. The news was like a clap of thunder, shaking both the imperial court and the harem. This would be Alexander Chen's first child since ascending the throne. If it was a son, the balance of power in the court would shift entirely. When I heard the news, I was trimming a bonsai. The scissors slipped and I snipped off a perfectly healthy branch. It felt as if a wound had opened in my own heart. It seemed the contraceptive, disguised as a nutritional tonic and sent to the Spring Palace, had been replaced. Marcus Liu was clearly one of Eunuch Gao's men, so it must have been the eunuch himself who switched the medicine. Eunuch Gao's reach extended that far. A stream of tonics and rewards were sent to her palace, but that night Alexander Chen came to mine. I was already asleep. He came in quietly, removed his robes, and slipped into bed, holding me through my nightgown. Soon, my back grew warm with a fine layer of sweat, and I could no longer pretend to be asleep. "Concubine Liu is with child. You should spend more time with her." Alexander Chen heard the jealousy in my voice and chuckled softly. "Are you jealous?" Furious, I tried to push away the arm wrapped around my waist, but he caught my hands, pinned them above my head, and leaned over me. He buried his face in my neck, his breath coming in heavy sighs, but he made no further move. "Bella, what are we going to do?" His breath tickled my skin, unsettling me. I looked up and saw the exhaustion etched on his face. He showed none of the joy of a new father. For some time now, a shadow of gloom had constantly clouded his brow. "If only this child were yours," he said, his voice choking. A single tear disappeared into my hair. The next day, the Empress Dowager unexpectedly summoned both me and Sophia Du to pay our respects. After a cup of tea, she called in her personal physicians to check our pulses. The doctors rattled on about how we were both deficient in some way. Then, the Empress Dowager gave each of us a prescription. The herbs were mostly for nourishment, though some were meant to aid conception. The doctor said we needn't take it every day. Just one dose after receiving the Emperor's favor would be enough. Later, when Alexander Chen stayed the night with me, a eunuch did indeed bring a freshly brewed dose of the medicine after we called for water. But Alexander Chen intercepted it and drank it himself. His reasoning was that as long as he was nourished and no longer deficient, my pregnancy was just a matter of time. It took me a moment to realize he was making a crude joke. Annoyed, I pushed at his chest, but he only took his shamelessness to a new level. After drinking the medicine, he even told the eunuch that I was the one who had taken it. That man is utterly shameless. With Iris Liu expecting a child, Marcus Liu postponed his return to West Pine. As the third month began, the spring hunt went ahead as scheduled. I chased a wild deer deep into the dense forest, but all three of my arrows missed their mark. Dejected, I dismounted and began to wander aimlessly. Suddenly, I heard a rustling sound. Someone was there. I was on alert in an instant. Knocking an arrow, I slowly approached the source of the noise. It wasn't an assassin. It was dozens of people in ragged clothes, refugees. The woman closest to me shrieked in terror when she saw the arrow in my hand, trembling as she clutched the child in her arms. How did these people get into the imperial hunting grounds? I lowered my bow and stepped closer. They told me they were all fleeing a cold spell that had devastated their hometown. Unable to enter the capital, they were forced to beg outside the city walls. They had seen the lush vegetation of the hunting grounds and snuck in to dig for wild vegetables, anything to fill their stomachs. I instinctively retorted, "Impossible. The court sent disaster relief 2 months ago. The refugees have already been settled." Disaster relief, the woman grew agitated. A bowl of watery gruel with only a few grains of rice at the bottom, and we only get one a day. When people complained, those damn officials just tore down the food stalls. Where is the justice in that? I was stunned. I don't know how I made my way back to the Imperial Lodge. Behind the tents, someone blocked my path. Julian Wong stood there in a simple short robe. The scar on his face looked particularly terrifying. He closed in on me, his every word a dagger. "Did you see, Empress? The capital gates are a dividing line. As long as the refugees are kept outside, the facade of peace can be maintained." My suspicion was confirmed. "You led me to those refugees on purpose?" "Julian Wong, what exactly are you trying to do?" "The Chen dynasty is rotten to the core. I don't mind replacing it." A smile still played on Julian Wong's lips as he uttered such treasonous words with unnerving nonchalance. My tone turned cold. "I am the Empress of the Chen dynasty. Aren't you afraid I'll have you arrested right now?" "You are Isabella Ye. You won't." Julian Wong was utterly certain. "You know Alexander Chen can't save the Chen dynasty. He can't save the common people. And..." His voice was like a phantom's whisper. "And Belle, you will help me." He was mad. He must have gone mad. I was so shocked and angry that I didn't notice the flicker of a bright yellow robe disappearing behind me. My heart was no longer in the spring hunt. The next day, I feigned illness and returned to the palace early. Alexander returned to the palace 3 days later, accompanied by noble consort Lu. Her belly was barely showing, yet she walked as though she needed to support her own back. I forgot to mention, Iris Lu was made a noble consort before she had even given birth to a son. It's different when you have powerful backers, isn't it? Though Iris Lu's father was a military man, she had never known a day in an army camp as I had. She was delicate, frail. A strong breeze at the Imperial Lodge was enough for her to complain of stomach pains. Alexander stayed with her in the Spring Palace for 2 full days. Lily was very worried. I told her I understood. He had said the timing of the child wasn't ideal, that it had perhaps chosen the wrong womb, but this was his first child. The child was innocent. It was only natural for him to be anxious. The wind and rain blew open the window lattice. Just moments ago, the sky outside had been clear and vast, but now it had begun to rain. When did the weather turn? On the 3rd day, Alexander came to dine with me. I caught the faint scent of medicine on his robes. It seemed Iris Lu's illness was real. After only a few bites, I couldn't hold back any longer. "The refugees from the winter cold snap, have they been properly settled?" The hand holding his chopsticks paused mid-air. "Yes. Porridge stalls have been set up along the roads in the affected prefectures. And now that spring is returning, the land can be tilled again and production has resumed." "Have there been any riots among the refugees?" I clenched my fists, my tone sharper than I intended. "No," he answered. A deep sense of disappointment washed over me. There had been riots in Liuzhou and Yongzhou. The government had sent troops to suppress them, and rivers of blood had flowed. But why was he hiding this from me? We used to review all the court memorials together. Come to think of it, he hadn't brought any memorials to my palace for review in a long time. I had never been good at hiding my feelings from him. I lost my appetite completely and set my chopsticks down with a clatter. The air in the Phoenix Palace instantly grew tense. "Really?" I pressed, unwilling to give up. He didn't speak, just frowned at me for a long moment. Before leaving, he said coldly, "Being a model for the nation is just an empty phrase. I can't do it, and neither can you." So why must you be so hard on me? News of the emperor and empress's discord spread through the court and the imperial harem the very next day. I was placed under house arrest for a month. Before my confinement was even over, another major event shook the court. Wade-Du submitted a memorial impeaching the Minister of Revenue, Edward Zhao, for forming cliques and colluding with the enemy. With only a handful of secret letters and 50,000 taels of silver found in Edward Zhao's home, Wade-Du and his faction cornered Alexander in the Great Hall, pressuring him to declare the man guilty. It was said Alexander threw the memorial to the ground and adjourned the court session early. Alexander had originally ordered this matter to be kept from me, but Lily found out and told me. I ignored my confinement and rushed to the Moral Hall, only to be told the emperor had been summoned to the Empress Dowager's quarters. I hurried there next. The Empress Dowager had never liked me. She had even excused me from my daily greetings just to avoid the sight of me. This time was no different. I couldn't get in, so I had no choice but to wait at the entrance. Edward Zhao was a top scholar, an upright man whose career had stalled under the previous emperor for his refusal to flatter those in power. Alexander and I had supported his rise, step by step, to Minister of Revenue. Soon after taking office, he had already exposed several corrupt officials. There was no collusion. He had simply gotten in the way of the Du family's greed. A long time passed before Alexander emerged. He froze when he saw me, his expression unreadable. He didn't chide me for leaving my quarters, but simply pulled my cloak tighter around me. It's cold. Why are you waiting out here? Your Majesty, Minister Zhao. Alexander avoided my gaze and pulled me along with him. After a long silence, he said, the evidence is conclusive. Dismissal from office is already a light punishment. For a charge of treason, dismissal would be an incredibly light punishment, but we both knew it was all a setup by Wade-Du. But Your Majesty, you know a man like Minister Zhao would never do such a thing. It's clearly a frame-up. My mind is made up. Say no more. I froze. He was speaking not as my husband, but as the emperor. Sensing he had spoken too harshly, his tone softened. Bella, Mother and my uncle are resolute. If we fight them head-on, we might not even be able to save his life. After saying this, he avoided my eyes and left in a hurry. Edward Zhao was dismissed from his post and exiled to Yongzhou. The reason Alexander had been able to eliminate the crown prince and become emperor within 6 months was that he had leaned on the power of eunuch Gao and the Empress Dowager's family, the Du clan. As a result, the rise of powerful eunuchs and overbearing in-laws was an entirely predictable outcome. The Chen dynasty had been rotting from the inside since the previous emperor's reign. He had wanted to change things. We had once stayed up late in the Spring Palace, poring over lists of officials, searching for worthy talents. I had even sought out surviving loyalists from the old Ye family army to secretly rebuild our strength. But all these plans were taking too long to bear fruit. Even if Alexander had only feigned foolishness to protect himself before, he was no god. Against the factions of eunuch Gao and the Empress Dowager, it was a struggle just to protect my honor and dignity within the harem. I didn't blame him, but this feeling of powerlessness was crushing. Yongzhou was a long and arduous journey away. All I could do was have Lily contact old retainers of the Ye family to protect Minister Zhao and his family in secret along the way. Before Lily could bring back any news, Iris Liu and Sophia Du had a major falling out. The story goes that they argued while admiring flowers in the imperial garden. There was a shove, and Iris Liu fell, which threatened her pregnancy and caused some bleeding. In an instant, nearly the entire Imperial Medical Academy was stationed outside the Spring Palace. Since my confinement wasn't yet over, I was happy to be spared the trouble. Taking advantage of the chaos, I had someone deliver a secret letter to Julian Wang. That night, I extinguished the lamps and went to bed early. In the darkness, the dripping of the water clock was the only sound. After the 2 cups of tea I'd set on the table had gone cold, the window was gently pushed open. Julian Wang was still dressed as a guard. He landed without a sound. "Belle, you're getting bolder, inviting someone directly into your bedchamber." He chuckled. I frowned. He had changed. Julian Wang had always been sharp-tongued, but there used to be a certain grace to him. Now, he carried a wicked air. How do you want me to help you? I asked, getting straight to the point. It seems you've thought it through, Belle. Are you going to scheme with me for the throne of the Chen dynasty? His words were incredibly grating. Cut the crap, I snapped. The moment the words left my mouth, Julian Wang's expression hardened. An instant later, a sleeve arrow shot towards the window. There was a faint gurgle of blood, and the person outside fell to the ground. It was a palace maid I recognized from the cleaning staff. Julian Wang sighed. One of Eunuch Gao's spies. It seems even after all of Alexander's efforts, your palace is far from impenetrable. I was surprised he could recognize a common spy. Now that she's dead, Eunuch Gao will surely become suspicious, I said, worried. Don't worry, my people are ready to take her place at any time. I was stunned by the meticulousness of his plans. But then, only someone like him could earn the reputation of being uncannily intelligent. Don't be surprised. This chess game began the day I faked my death and escaped from West Pine, Julian said frankly. After faking my death, I drifted among the small states bordering the Chen dynasty. In various disguises, I served as an advisor to their royal families, all while cultivating my own network of spies. A year ago, I went alone to the northern regions and chose the current Prince Darius, forging an alliance with him. As I taught him how to strengthen his tribe and win the hearts of his people, I also advised Marcus Liu on how to crush the Wolf division led by Darius's older brother. With that, Darius rose to power, and I became Marcus Liu's trusted confidant. Belle, from the day my family was annihilated, I swore I would have my revenge. And my enemies aren't just Eunuch Gao, they include the Chen imperial family. So Belle, you can't stop me. What do you need me to do? I asked. The night was as cool as water, the lone moon hanging on a branch. I clutched the corner of my robe, my heart in turmoil. Just as Julian Wang had said, I couldn't stop him. So rather than remain passive, I might as well seize the greatest possible advantage, for myself and for Alexander. If my grandfather were still alive, he would surely tell me whether what I was doing was right or wrong. 2 months later, seeking to end the long standoff with the northern regions, the Chen dynasty proposed peace talks. However, their envoy was met with deliberate provocation. The talks failed, and relations between the two nations grew tense. A few days later, the northern regions, in alliance with the Yueshi, the Nanxiao kingdom, and other states, launched a coordinated attack on the Chen dynasty. The borders were in crisis. Marcus Liu, along with Julian Wang, marched through the night to return to West Pine. During the previous emperor's reign, the Chen dynasty's borders had been relatively peaceful, apart from the northern regions. As a result, the court favored civil officials over military ones. By the time Alexander ascended the throne, there were few capable generals in the court. Most were men like Marcus Liu, who had risen through factional ties. So now, with multiple nations attacking at once, the Chen dynasty found itself with little power to resist. The prince of pacifying the south was captured alive by the Nanxiao kingdom. The general of the eastern campaign was gravely wounded by a Yueshi commander, losing 2 cities in 3 days. When news came that Julian Wang had been surrounded at Mount Wuqi while pursuing the northern army, I could bear it no longer. I took out my long-sealed dark iron scimitar and went to the Moral Hall. The scimitar had been a gift from my third uncle for my 10th birthday. The blade was taller than me then, and I couldn't even lift it. But within a year, I could wield it with a powerful grace. I had even used it once to save Alexander's life. In fact, the blade had another name, one I had given it myself, Ping Di. Ping Di sounded like pacify the enemy, and I thought it was incredibly grand at the time. Alexander had not slept for 3 straight nights. The military reports on his desk were piled as high as a mountain. He seemed to have anticipated my arrival. Before I could speak, a look of sadness filled his eyes. I told him I wanted to go to war, to West Pine. After a long silence, he asked softly, "Are you going for the sake of the Chen dynasty, or to save Julian Wang?" "For the duty that rests on the shoulders of every child of the Ye family," I replied. "And if I do not agree?" I smiled and knelt. "You can't stop me." To my surprise, almost no one in the court objected to my leading the campaign. Those white-bearded civil officials suddenly recalled that my Ye family had always been skilled in battle, with a history of countless military achievements. As for eunuch Gao and the Du family, they were simply hoping I would die on the battlefield, leaving the position of Empress vacant for Iris Liu or Sophia Du. They couldn't wait for me to leave. How laughable. The nation was in peril, yet this was all they could think about. The day before my departure, Alexander came to my palace for a final dinner. Neither of us spoke. Later, in bed, he held me tightly, and we lay awake all night. As dawn broke, he spoke in a hoarse voice. "I'm sorry, Bella. Back then, to save you from my older brother, I seized the throne. You said our families had a blood feud, that we could never go back. I didn't believe it. I made you Empress, gave you the highest honor, and tried to govern well. But in the end, the prosperous Chen dynasty you wanted, I couldn't give it to you." His words summed up his 4 years on the throne, but not a single one was a plea for me to come back alive. When I left for the campaign, no one came to see me off. It was just like when I left the capital at the age of 12. This time, I didn't look back. I was so afraid. By the time I reached West Pine, after forced marches day and night, Julian Wang had already been trapped for weeks. The northern regions had attacked with shocking force. Only then did Marcus Liu realize that the seemingly refined Prince Darius was far more cunning than any of his predecessors. One Julian Wang, one deputy commander, in Marcus Liu's eyes, they weren't worth the risk. So after resting for just half a day, I led my men to Mount Wuki to rescue Julian. Marcus Liu was quick to give me soldiers, but he looked at me as if I were already a dead woman. I was confident in my knowledge of West Pine's terrain, and I knew our old enemy, the northern regions, just as well. I had prepared for every possibility before setting out. However, sometimes you shouldn't be so confident. I was surrounded. Trapped on Mount Wuki, right alongside Julian Wang. Julian couldn't help but laugh bitterly. What do you think? Is Marcus Liu back in his tent, slapping his thigh and roaring with laughter at how stupid we are, marching to our deaths, one after the other? I shrugged. When I set out to rescue him, I never imagined I'd miscalculate so badly. If my uncles and aunt found out, they'd curse me for disgracing the Yi family name. I don't know if Marcus Liu was slapping his thigh when he laughed, but I know his laughter didn't last long. When news of my entrapment reached the capital, Alexander Chen became frantic. He gave Marcus Liu a direct order: rescue me, no matter the cost. He even ignored the protests of his court officials and decided to lead the army himself. With Alexander himself on the way, Marcus Liu, for all his arrogance, didn't dare openly defy an imperial edict. He had no choice but to lead the rescue mission personally. Of course, the northern regions weren't going to let us be rescued so easily. Prince Darius had surrounded us for days without attacking for a reason. He was using us as bait to lure a bigger fish, Marcus Liu. And now it seemed one Marcus Liu wasn't enough. They were getting an emperor as a bonus. What a jackpot. In the heat of battle, blades have no eyes. Prince Darius truly is a natural-born leader. The wolf warriors of the northern regions fought even more ferociously under his training. As for the Chen dynasty's army, at a single command from Julian Wang, Marcus Liu's soldiers were cut down by their own comrades before they could even react. I knew who they were. The men who had turned were old soldiers of the Ye army, men I had spent 4 years placing in Marcus Liu's ranks under new identities. And now, under my orders, they answered to Julian Wang. My mind flashed back to Julian's secret visit to my palace. "What do you need me to do?" I had asked. "Belle, I need you to lead an army against the northern regions and feign capture. Alexander will then stop at nothing to force Marcus Liu out of the city to rescue you. At the same time, give me command of all our old Yi family soldiers. Prince Darius has promised me 100,000 iron cavalry. Once West Pine's walls are breached, we can march straight for the capital." From the moment I agreed, it was all a carefully laid trap. West Pine was easy to defend and hard to attack. The old Yi army soldiers were too few. Without the help of the northern army, our plan would be nearly impossible. Luring Marcus Liu out of the city was the key. One Julian Wang wasn't enough, so they added me to the bait. But I had underestimated my place in Alexander's heart. I never imagined he would actually take to the field himself, just to save me. Amid the glint of blades and the thundering of hooves, I desperately spurred my horse toward that flash of imperial yellow, brandishing my sword, pacifier of the north. For a fleeting moment, it was like we were back in Liangzhou all those years ago. But this time, when a hidden projectile sliced through the air, I failed to block it for him. A spray of red exploded before my eyes. Alexander looked back at me one last time before collapsing to the ground. Marcus Liu's defeat was total. The defenses of Westpine were finally breached. 3 days later, Julian Wang and I personally led the 100,000 cavalry from the northern regions. We bypassed the Chen dynasty's most heavily guarded checkpoints and seized the throne. The once all-powerful eunuch Gao was kicked to the ground. Even then, he pointed a finger at my nose and shrieked, his voice piercingly shrill, "Isabella Ye, you were the Empress of our Chen dynasty, yet you colluded with a traitor and betrayed our country." Before he could finish, a blade pierced his tongue. He abused his power. I betrayed my country. Neither of us was any nobler than the other. Julian bent down, savoring eunuch Gao's screams as the blade pierced his right eye, then dragged it, slick with blood, across his wrinkled, bark-like face. He was venting his fury. He was taking his revenge. The great house had fallen. All its former power and wealth had turned to dust and ashes. Julian told me that Alexander Chen may not have been a good emperor, but he was certainly a good husband. Blood stained the corners of his robes. The clash of armies surrounded us, yet he lay in my arms, his gaze gentle. He said, "Bella, I can never atone for the innocent lives lost from the Yi and Wang families. In my life, I failed to achieve what I set out to do. If Julian Wang can truly bring you a world of peace and prosperity, then my death is the last thing I can do for you." Before I left the palace, I sent men to ensure the child in Iris Liu's womb would not be born. Only with my death, and only with the end of the Chen bloodline, can Julian's throne be secure. Bella, you only have one life. You must cherish it. Live well. He knew a fallen power does not die easily. If Alexander or any of his children had survived, his loyalists would have used them as a banner to restore the Chen dynasty. How ruthless he was, to have calculated even this. Prince Darius's support of 100,000 iron cavalry came with another condition: the 12 cities of Mingzhou. However, he allowed 3 days to evacuate the civilians. With Julian's wisdom and methods, he is bound to be a good emperor. He promised me he would reclaim the 12 cities of Mingzhou within 5 years. It is the way of the world. Those who align will unite, and those who diverge will part. He and Prince Darius had been allies. From now on, they would be enemies. Such is the path of an emperor. The people of Ping City were fleeing south with their families. I walked against the current of the crowd, heading into the city, when I bumped into someone. It was the little beggar who once tapped his bowl and envied me for having friends in the capital. But now he was dressed in silks and had taken wives and concubines. But I no longer had any friends in the capital.